In 1998, a mother, father, and their 2 children stepped onto Platform 9 at Briarwood Station to catch a morning train, and were never seen again. Security footage showed them waiting calmly, the clock behind them frozen at 7:45. But when the platform emptied minutes later, the family was gone. Their tickets were never used. Their luggage was never found. Police scoured the tunnels, the rails, every entrance and exit. Nothing. The only trace left behind was a child's stuffed rabbit lying on the platform floor. Its fur singed, as if burned by heat no one else felt. For over 2 decades, detectives, grieving relatives, and a city full of commuters have asked the same question. What happened to the family on Platform 9? The rain that night was steady, falling in fine, slanted sheets that painted the lamps of Briarwood Station in hazy halos of yellow light. The few passengers who lingered on the concourse moved quickly, shoulders hunched, collars up, each person intent on escape, onto a train, into a waiting car, anywhere but here. The Halloways did not look hurried. CCTV footage, grainy and gray, showed them walking together, their steps unhurried, their shapes flickering in and out of shadow beneath the high glass roof. Thomas Halloway, 38 years old, a history teacher, clean-shaven, hair slicked back, kept his arm looped protectively around his wife's shoulder. Elaine, 36, a librarian, pale and angular, her posture stiff from years of migraines, walked with a faint limp, though she tried to hide it. Their daughter, 17-year-old Melanie, held her younger brother's hand. Daniel, only 9, clutched his stuffed rabbit in the other, its ear dragging along the wet tiles. At precisely 10:14 p.m., the family entered Platform 9. The camera above the ticket barriers caught them passing through, their tickets raised, the scanner lights blinking green. Another camera, mounted at the far end, showed them pausing by a bench. Elaine sat down, smoothing her damp skirt, while Thomas checked the departures board. Melanie tilted her head against the bench rail, tapping her Walkman, while Daniel hopped across the yellow safety line, his reflection rippling in the puddles left by the rain. At 10:17 p.m., the footage blinked. It was not a total blackout, only a flicker, a distortion, like static shivering across the frame. When the picture returned, the bench was empty. The luggage remained stacked neatly on the tiles, a navy suitcase, a floral-patterned tote, a small backpack with a soccer patch sewn to the side. But the family themselves were gone. Gone. No one on the opposite platform noticed their disappearance. No passengers on the arriving train remembered seeing them board. The conductor swore he had checked every carriage. 4 cars, light traffic, and the Halloways were not inside. By 10:45, the station was nearly deserted. A cleaner making his rounds noticed the luggage. He called the ticket office. By midnight, the police had cordoned off the area. The search began at dawn. Dogs swept the tracks, trained to detect human scent. Divers combed the nearby river. Helicopters hovered over the woods that bordered the station, but no evidence surfaced. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no witnesses who remembered screams. The Halloways had stepped into the most surveilled space in Briarwood and vanished in front of a dozen cameras. Theories bloomed and withered. A carefully planned abduction, a witness protection relocation gone wrong, a family suicide pact, even a few muttered rumors of the supernatural. The station was old, its foundations layered over tunnels from the 1800s, its history dark with accidents and fires. But none of these theories held weight. For years, the luggage was stored in an evidence locker, the tickets preserved in plastic sleeves, the stuffed rabbit sealed in an airtight bag. Detectives rotated, task forces dissolved, media interest waned. Eventually, the Halloways became one of countless cold cases filed under Unsolved Disappearance. And yet, every October, when the rain falls and the station lamps glow faintly through the mist, commuters swear they see something on Platform 9. a flicker of figures. A woman with a limp. A boy dragging a toy. A man with his arm protectively around them. A family caught mid-stride. Some claim the Halloways are still there, replaying their final moments like an old tape caught in a loop. Others believe the truth is simpler and darker, that the family never left Briarwood Station at all. The official record ends here. But stories rarely end cleanly. They seep, they return, they demand retelling. And tonight, we return to Platform 9. Detective Samuel Greer hated the smell of train stations. The air always seemed to carry a stale cocktail of diesel exhaust, wet concrete, and spilled coffee. A smell that clung to his coat long after he left. But it wasn't the smell that made him pause outside Briarwood Station that night in 1997. It was the quiet. For a Friday, the concourse should have been alive with motion, passengers rushing for the last trains, announcements echoing overhead. Instead, the hall was eerily subdued. A small cluster of uniformed officers gathered beneath the giant clock, their radios hissing. Beyond them, yellow tape cordoned off Platform 9, its benches wet from rain, its lamps casting blurred halos onto the slick tiles. Greer tightened his scarf and walked in. "Evening," he said, flashing his badge at the constable guarding the cordon. "Detective Greer, Major Crimes. What have we got?" The young officer looked relieved to hand the matter off. "Missing persons, family of 4. Luggage left behind, no sign of them boarding. We've been searching the station since 11. Greer frowned. Families didn't simply vanish in train stations. Drunks, yes. Runaways, often. But whole families. That was chaos, mess, noise. This was too clean. He ducked under the tape and stepped onto Platform 9. The first thing he saw was the luggage. A navy suitcase, upright against the bench. A floral tote bag, its zipper half open. And a small red backpack decorated with a stitched soccer patch. Rain had spotted the fabric, but otherwise everything looked undisturbed, waiting for its owners to return. He crouched, unzipped the tote. Inside were paperbacks, neatly stacked. One was a library book, stamped with a due date of October 20th. He picked up the backpack next. Light. He opened it. Inside was a half-empty juice box, 2 crayons, and a stuffed rabbit with matted fur and a missing eye. Greer felt the weight of it settle in his chest. This was a child's world, ordinary and fragile. And now the child who owned it was gone. He straightened, eyes sweeping the platform. The rain had tapered to a mist, dripping from the edges of the roof onto the yellow safety line. Beyond, the tracks gleamed silver under the lamps. Nothing looked disturbed. A uniformed sergeant approached. "Detective, CCTV footage is ready for review." Greer nodded, grateful for something concrete. He followed the sergeant through a side door and down a narrow corridor lined with peeling posters. In the security office, a bank of monitors flickered. An operator rewound a tape, the images jerking backward through time until the screen showed a family entering the platform. "There," the operator said, freezing the frame. "The Halloways." Greer leaned closer. A man, late 30s, arm draped around a woman's shoulders. A teenage girl with headphones dangling from her neck. A boy hopping at the edge of the yellow line, dragging a stuffed rabbit. The details were blurred, but their body language was unmistakably familiar. Family. Together. "Run it," Greer said. The footage rolled forward. The family sat, waited. The boy darted across the line, the girl tapped her Walkman, the man checked the departure board. Then, static. For 2 seconds, the picture scrambled, lines of interference running down the screen. When it cleared, the bench was empty. Only the luggage remained. "Jesus," Greer muttered. "Any chance the camera dropped frames?" The operator shook his head. "No mechanical failure. Power never dipped. The tape is intact. They were just there 1 second, gone the next." Greer rewound. Watched it again. The glitch. The empty bench. Again. Again. Each time, the same. Other angles? The operator switched to another camera, mounted near the ticket barriers. The family passed through at 10:14. Another camera, above the far platform. The family walked into frame, paused, and then, nothing. "Do we have anyone who saw them board?" Greer asked. The sergeant answered. "Conductor of the 1020 swears they weren't on board. Says he checked every carriage." Greer exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. It didn't make sense. A family couldn't just disappear under bright lamps and multiple cameras. Someone had to have seen something. "Get me a list of everyone who boarded or left the station between 10 and 11. Names, addresses, everything. I want interviews tonight." The sergeant nodded and left. Greer remained in the cramped office, staring at the frozen image of the empty platform. He had worked homicides, abductions, suicides. He had seen mess, blood, chaos. But this was absence. A hole cut in reality where 4 people should be. By dawn, the search had spread. Dogs were brought in, their noses pressed to the luggage, tails stiff as they traced the family's scent down the platform. And then, nothing. The trail ended at the bench, as if the family had vanished into thin air. Divers combed the river that ran behind the station. Nothing. Officers swept the wooded embankments. Nothing. By midday, reporters had arrived, their microphones thrust at officers, their questions sharp. Was this a kidnapping? Was there a suspect? How could a family vanish from a public platform? Greer gave them nothing. He didn't have answers. At noon, he sat across from the station master, a pale man in a rumpled uniform. "You saw nothing unusual?" Greer pressed. "Nothing," the station master said, wringing his hands. "They passed through like everyone else. Normal family. No arguments. No strangers hanging around." The man shook his head. "Any history on this platform? Accidents, incidents?" The station master hesitated. "It's old. Built in the 1880s. There've been accidents. A fire in 1912, a collapse in the 30s. But nothing recent." Greer jotted notes. Old stations carried histories like scars. Sometimes the public forgot, but buildings remembered. He wasn't superstitious, but he knew places held weight. That night, exhausted, Greer returned to the tape. He watched the footage again, frame by frame. The glitch. The absence. On the third pass, he noticed something. A shadow, faint, barely there, at the edge of the frame just before the distortion. It looked like a figure, standing too close to the family. Not clear enough to identify, but enough to suggest presence. He froze the frame, leaning close. There, a blur of black, the outline of a head, shoulders, watching. Greer felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. The Halloways hadn't vanished. Someone had been with them, someone the cameras barely caught. And if that was true, then this was no accident of fate. This was a crime. And whoever had taken the Halloways had planned it perfectly. By the third day, the Halloway disappearance was national news. Television vans clustered outside Briarwood Station, their satellite dishes angled skyward like metal sunflowers. Headlines screamed across breakfast tables. "Family vanishes from Platform 9. CCTV mystery baffles police." Talk shows speculated on cults, kidnappers, even alien abductions. Detective Greer hated the noise of the press. He kept his head down, his coat collar high, pushing through the crowd of cameras on his way inside the station. Behind the yellow tape, the platform was unchanged, luggage still sealed in evidence bags, tiles still damp with October rain. But something about the space felt heavier now, as if the weight of the nation's eyes had pressed its secrets deeper underground. Greer's notebook bulged with interviews. Witnesses, passengers, staff. Most had noticed nothing. A few recalled glimpses. The boy skipping along the line, the girl tugging her headphones. Harmless, ordinary fragments. But one statement had stood out. A cleaner named Harold Briggs claimed he saw a tall man in a long coat lingering near the family just before they vanished. No face, no details, just an impression of presence. It matched the blur Greer had seen on the tape. The first interview that morning was with the conductor of the 10:20 train, a wiry man in his 40s with nicotine-stained fingers. He sat stiffly in the break room, cap on the table, hands folded tight. "I checked every carriage," he insisted for the third time. "We weren't busy." "I had time. No family of 4 on that train. You're certain?" Greer pressed. "Certain." The man's voice cracked with frustration. "Do you know how many times I've been asked that?" They weren't there. Greer studied him. Exhaustion ringed the man's eyes. He looked haunted, as if replaying the night in his head, over and over, searching for a missed detail. "You didn't see anyone unusual?" The man hesitated. "There was a woman in the last carriage. Staring out the window. Didn't blink when I checked her ticket. Just kept staring. Pale, dark coat. Gave me the shivers. Did she have luggage?" "No." Greer noted it down. "A woman. Unresponsive." It could mean nothing, or everything. By mid-afternoon, Greer was in a terraced street on the south side of Briarwood, sitting opposite Martha Jenkins, Elaine Holloway's sister. Martha looked older than her 41 years, her face drawn, her hands restless in her lap. A framed photograph of Elaine sat on the mantelpiece, her sister's smile caught in softer years. "She wouldn't just leave," Martha said firmly. "Not Elaine. Not with the children. She wasn't like that." "You spoke recently?" Greer asked. "Every week. She called me on Tuesday. We talked about Daniel's birthday. He wanted a microscope like his father's. She was going to surprise him." Her voice broke. Greer leaned forward. "Did she mention anyone unusual in her life? Strangers, arguments, debts?" Martha shook her head. "They were quiet people. Work, school, books. Tom was a history teacher, for heaven's sake. The most dangerous thing in his life was chalk dust." Greer glanced at the photograph again. Elaine with her neat bob of hair, serious but kind eyes. A librarian, a mother. Not a woman who simply walked away from her life. Martha caught his look. "Find them," she whispered. "Please, don't let them be just another file in a drawer." The following morning, a tip arrived by phone. An elderly man claimed he had seen the Holloways in the days before they vanished, arguing with someone in the station cafe. Greer drove out to meet him at a retirement home on the edge of town. The man, Arthur Mills, had a face lined like folded paper and eyes sharp despite his years. "They were sitting by the window," Arthur said. "I noticed because the boy kept dropping crumbs, feeding the pigeons outside." The father was tense, kept glancing over his shoulder. At who? Arthur thought. A tall man, dark coat, just standing by the counter. Didn't order anything, just watched them. Greer's pen froze. Again, the tall man, always at the edges. "Could you describe him?" "Not really. He had one of those faces, forgettable. But the way he stood, it was wrong. Like he was waiting for something, or someone. Greer left with his pulse racing. 2 witnesses, independent of each other, describing the same figure. A man who lingered near the family, but never close enough to be caught clearly on camera. Someone who knew how to disappear. Back at the station, Greer pulled the CCTV tapes again. He stared at the static glitch until his eyes blurred. He slowed the frames, brightened the image, sharpened the edges. The blur resolved into something almost human. A tall shape, coat swinging, face lost in shadow. For a moment, just a single frame. It looked as if the figure was leaning close to Elaine, whispering. Then static swallowed the image whole. Greer sat back, unsettled. If this was abduction, it was surgical. No screams, no trace. No forced entry or exit. Just removal. But why take an entire family? And how? By the end of the week, the case had consumed him. He barely slept, his nights filled with half-dreams of empty platforms and blurred faces. He imagined the Holloway's last moments, waiting, unaware, the boy skipping across the yellow line, the girl lost in her music, the mother's limp, the father's protective arm. What had they seen in those final seconds? Who had they trusted? Greer found himself returning to Platform 9 at odd hours, standing by the bench where the luggage had been. He would close his eyes and listen. The hum of lamps, the drip of rain, the echo of distant footsteps. And sometimes, in the silence between trains, he thought he heard voices, faint, distorted. A boy's laugh, a woman calling a name. Each time he opened his eyes, the platform was empty. But the feeling lingered, that the Holloways were not gone, not entirely, that some part of them remained, caught between the static of those missing frames, and whoever had taken them was still out there, watching. By the second week, Briarwood Station felt less like a transport hub and more like a crime scene museum. The yellow tape was still up, cordoning off Platform 9, though trains continued to come and go. Commuters slowed as they passed, eyes drawn to the empty bench, whispering superstitions. The press had mostly moved on, chasing fresher tragedies, but locals lingered. Some left flowers, some lit candles, others simply stood, as if waiting for the family to return. Detective Greer walked the platform again, his shoes echoing against the tiles. He had memorized every angle of the CCTV footage, every statement, every conflicting rumor. But there was one lead he hadn't chased properly. The station itself. The building was old. Too old. And every time Greer stood beneath the iron beams and glass roof, he felt it, the sense of history pressing down like damp air. That morning, he requested the original blueprints. By afternoon, he was seated in the dusty records room of Briarwood's municipal archives, the sharp scent of mold and paper filling his lungs. The clerk, a thin man with nicotine-stained fingers, unrolled the maps across the table. "There," the clerk said, pointing with a trembling nail. Platform 9 wasn't part of the original station. Added in 1910, after the fire destroyed half the concourse. Greer traced the ink lines. The platform's foundation was built directly over an older structure, maintenance tunnels, service rooms, even a disused coal chute from the days of steam engines. "Are any of these accessible?" Greer asked. The clerk hesitated. "Some were sealed decades ago, but..." He tapped a small rectangle marked sub-level access. "There's still a hatch at the far end of Platform 9. Locked now. Hardly anyone remembers it's there." Greer felt his pulse quicken. The cameras had shown no one leaving the platform, but if there had been another exit, one buried in the bones of the station, then the impossible might suddenly make sense. That evening, armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, Greer returned. The platform was quiet, the last commuters gone, the lamps humming. He walked to the far end, where shadows pooled thick against the brick wall, and there it was. A rusted hatch, half hidden beneath layers of grime. A padlock sealed it, but the metal was corroded. Greer wedged the crowbar in and heaved. The lock snapped with a sharp crack. The hatch groaned open, releasing a breath of stale air that smelled of coal dust and damp stone. He crouched, shining the beam into the darkness. Narrow steps descended into shadow. Greer hesitated. Procedure dictated he call backup, but instinct, the same instinct that had carried him through 2 decades of investigations, told him he needed to see this himself. He descended. The steps led into a tunnel of brick and soot. Pipes lined the walls, dripping condensation. His flashlight beam caught graffiti scrawled across the damp bricks. Names, dates, crude symbols. Some were fresh. The tunnel split into 2 branches. To the left, a collapse blocked the way. To the right, The passage stretched deeper, vanishing into black. Greer moved forward slowly, his breath echoing. The air was cold, metallic, as if it had been trapped for a century. 50 yards in, he found a door, wooden, warped, its paint peeling. He pushed. The hinges shrieked, and the smell that hit him made his stomach turn. Mildew, rot, and something sharper beneath it. Inside was a small chamber. Dust lay thick on the floor, but the center was disturbed. Someone had been here recently. Greer's beam landed on the far wall. Drawings, dozens of them, sketched in charcoal. Figures standing on a platform. A boy with a toy rabbit. A girl with headphones, a man with his arm around a woman. Over and over, the same 4 figures, drawn until the wall was black with their repetition. Greer's throat went dry. On the floor beneath the drawing sat a small object. He crouched, hand trembling as he lifted it. A cassette tape. Label worn, letters faint. He could just make out the words, Melanie H., the daughter. Greer pocketed the tape, his mind racing. Someone had been here. Someone who knew the family, who had watched them, studied them, and maybe, just maybe, recorded them. The next morning, Greer carried the tape into the evidence lab. The technician, a young woman with steady hands, slid it into a deck. The tape hissed, then crackled. At first, only static. Then, a voice, faint. A girl's voice. "Dad, can we go now? It's late." Greer's stomach dropped. More static. Then another voice, sharper. A man's, not Thomas Halloway. "Shh, just wait. The train is coming. You'll see the girl again, frightened. I don't want to—" The tape cut. The room was silent. Greer gripped the table, knuckles white. The family hadn't vanished by accident. They had been led. Someone had lured them beneath the station, and someone had kept their voices. That night, sleep refused him. Greer sat in his apartment, cigarette burning low, the tape replaying in his head. The man's voice, calm, coaxing, certain, haunted him. He pulled out the CCTV still again, the shadow leaning close to Elaine. Was that the same voice? Was that the whisper caught in static? Greer rubbed his eyes. He had been chasing ghosts for days, but now he had something tangible. A tape, a chamber, drawings. And whoever had left them deliberately, as if wanting to be found. At dawn, he returned to the tunnels with a team. The chamber was documented, photographed, sealed. The drawings were scraped and bagged, the cassette catalogued. But the question remained, where did the other passageways lead? Hours later, maps spread across the precinct table. Greer traced the branching tunnels. Some led nowhere, some ended at sealed grates. But one line, faint and nearly erased, caught his attention. A service tunnel that ran parallel to the main tracks and ended beneath Platform 9. The tunnels beneath Briarwood Station were older than the city wanted to remember. Detective Greer stood at the mouth of the newly rediscovered passage, helmet lamp slicing through the dust. His team of officers shifted behind him, their boots scraping against damp stone. The air was heavy, tasting of rust and mildew, as though it had been trapped for a century and only now released. "Stay tight," Greer ordered. His voice echoed, swallowed quickly by the dark. They moved in single file, flashlights catching the glint of old rails embedded in the floor, long since abandoned. The walls were marked with soot and streaks of white lime, scars of forgotten fires. The deeper they went, the colder it grew. 10 minutes in, one of the officers cursed softly. Greer swung his light toward him. There, in the dust along the tunnel wall, was a small handprint, too small for an adult. The smudges were old, blurred, but the shape was undeniable. Greer crouched, running a gloved finger over it. His stomach tightened. A child had been down here. He straightened. "Keep moving." The passage sloped downward. Rats skittered in the shadows. Pipes creaked overhead, dripping cold water that spattered onto their shoulders. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the steady crunch of boots. Finally, the tunnel widened into a chamber. Greer lifted his light. The room was circular, brick walls stained black. A rusted iron ladder led up to a sealed grate. In the center lay a scattering of objects, carefully arranged on the dirt floor. The team froze. There was a woman's shoe, scuffed leather, the sole worn thin. Beside it, a cracked pair of glasses, a hairbrush with strands still tangled in its teeth, and, most chilling of all, a small toy rabbit, its fur matted, its single glass eye gleaming in the beam of the flashlight. Greer's chest constricted. The same rabbit he'd seen in the CCTV footage dangling from Daniel's hand. He knelt, reaching for it. His gloves brushed damp fur. He remembered the juice box and crayons found in the backpack on the platform. Now the rabbit was here, in a place no child should ever have been. "Bag everything," he said hoarsely. The officers moved silently, their gloves trembling as they sealed each artifact. The chamber felt wrong, like a stage set left to rot, objects positioned deliberately for someone to find. Greer shone his light upward. The grate above was rusted shut, but the iron bore scratches, as though someone had once tried to claw their way out. Back at the precinct, the items were laid out under fluorescent light. The evidence board groaned with photographs, maps, witness statements. Now, in the center, sat the rabbit. Greer stared at it until the room blurred. He could hear Daniel's laugh from the footage, could see the boy hopping across the yellow line. The rabbit had been there, and now it was here, pulled from the dark like an accusation. He turned to the forensics officer. "I want trace analysis, fibers, DNA, everything. I don't care if it takes all week." The officer nodded, already swabbing. Greer left the room, the walls of the station closing in. The press smelled blood. By morning, headlines screamed, "Evidence found in station tunnels. Holloway case, breakthrough or dead end." Reporters camped outside the precinct, microphones raised like weapons. Greer was forced into a briefing. Cameras clicked as he stepped to the podium. Exhaustion etched into his features. "We have recovered personal belongings believed to be connected to the Holloway family," he announced. "These items are undergoing forensic analysis. We are pursuing all leads." The questions erupted. Were the Holloways alive? Who placed the items there? Was the station hiding something? Greer gave no answers. He had none. That night, alone in his office, he studied the photographs again. The handprint, the artifacts, the scratches on the grate. A pattern was forming, though he couldn't yet see it clearly. Whoever had taken the family had led them into the tunnels. But why leave the belongings? Why arrange them like offerings? Greer thought of the drawings on the wall, the endless sketches of the family. This wasn't just abduction. It was obsession. He leaned back, cigarette smoke curling around his head. Somewhere beneath the noise of the investigation, beneath the static of the tapes and the chatter of witnesses, a story was trying to emerge, and he feared it was darker than anything he had imagined. 3 days later, the lab results arrived. The glasses bore Elaine Holloway's prescription. The shoe matched a pair photographed in family albums. The hairbrush carried strands of her hair. And the rabbit carried something else. Fibers not from the tunnels. Synthetic, dark, woven. A fabric consistent with a heavy overcoat. Greer froze. The tall man. The blur on the tape. The rabbit had brushed against him. That evening, Greer returned once more to Platform 9. The lamps hummed. The rain fell steady. He stood by the bench, staring at the empty space where the family had last been seen. Somewhere, beneath his feet, lay the tunnels, the belongings, the echoes of voices on a tape. And somewhere, above ground, was the man who had orchestrated it all, watching, waiting, Greer whispered into the rain. "I'll find you." Rain had a way of amplifying the silence. Detective Greer sat in the records office of Briarwood Station, its fluorescent lights flickering as drops pattered steadily against the high windows. The walls were lined with metal cabinets, each drawer heavy with forgotten cases. Dust clung to the handles, the smell of old paper mixing with damp stone. He wasn't there for the present. He was there for the past. If the tunnels had claimed the Halloways, he needed to know whether they had ever claimed anyone else. The clerk, reluctant at first, eventually surrendered the station's incident logs dating back a century. Greer spread them across the table, fingers blackened with ink, flipping page after brittle page. Accidents, fires, collapses, workers crushed. A conductor struck by a falling beam, but scattered among them were smaller notices. Missing persons, vague reports, disappearances noted, then abandoned. One caught his eye. October 1912. A family of 3 reported missing. Last seen on Platform 9 following fire restoration works. No trace found. Case closed, unresolved. Greer leaned back, pulse quickening. Another dated 1936. Couple vanished after late train. Platform 9. No witnesses. And again in 1954. 2 boys, ages 9 and 11. Last seen playing near Platform 9. Never recovered. The pattern was undeniable. Every few decades, the platform swallowed people. Greer took the files back to his office, pinning copies onto the evidence board. The photographs of the Halloways stared back at him. Smiling family portraits, school pictures, snapshots of ordinary life. Now they hung beside yellowed reports of others lost decades earlier. Different names, same void. He traced the timeline with his finger. 1912, 1936, 1954, 1997. It wasn't random. Something about Platform 9 had always been hungry. The next morning, Greer sought out someone who might remember. In a nursing home on the city's edge lived Walter Price, 93, a retired rail worker who had spent 40 years at Briarwood. His memory, the nurse warned, was sharp in patches, clouded in others. Walter sat by the window, blanket on his lap, hands veined like river maps. His eyes, when he looked up, were pale but alert. "You worked the station in the 50s, Greer began gently. "Do you remember 2 boys who went missing in 54? Walter's face tightened. Everyone remembered. They were just kids. One had a striped cap. I saw them running along the platform, laughing. Then they were gone how? Walter shook his head slowly. It was like the air swallowed them. 1 second they were there, the next they weren't. People said they ran into the tunnels, but we searched. Nothing. Greer leaned forward. "Did anyone see a man?" Tall, dark coat. Walter's eyes flickered. For a moment, he looked younger, as if a memory had clawed its way up from the depths. "There was always a man," he whispered. "Not the same face, but the coat, always the coat. I saw him after the boys vanished, standing on the far end of the platform, watching. Who was he?" Walter's gaze turned distant. "Don't know, but every time someone disappeared, someone swore they saw him. Coat as black as soot." Just standing there, Greer's skin prickled. The tall man was no recent phantom. He had been haunting Platform 9 for nearly a century. That evening, Greer walked the empty station alone. He stopped at the far end of Platform 9, where shadows bled thick against the brick. He imagined the families before, the couple in 36, the children in 54, waiting under these same lamps, unaware that they were about to vanish into history. The tall man had been here too, watching. Greer lit a cigarette, the smoke curling upward like mist. He told himself it was obsession, not superstition, that there was a rational explanation buried somewhere in the blueprints, in the tapes, in the forensics. And yet, he could not shake the thought. What if the platform itself was complicit? What if the station was not just a backdrop, but a trap? designed or cursed to draw people in and erase them. The thought chilled him, but he wrote it in his notebook all the same. 2 days later, the lab called. The fibers from the rabbit had been analyzed further. They weren't just consistent with a coat. They were specific. Wool, woven in a pattern discontinued in the 1970s. Vintage, the technician explained. Whoever wore this coat has been wearing it for decades. Or it's been preserved, passed down. Greer stared at the report. The tall man wasn't just a shadow in testimony. He had substance, fabric, fibers, a coat that should have long ago been discarded. He thought of Walter's trembling voice. There was always a man. The Halloways weren't the first to vanish, and unless Greer stopped him, they wouldn't be the last. Late that night, unable to sleep, Greer returned once more to the CCTV tape. He froze the frame just before the glitch, staring at the blur beside Elaine Halloway. He imagined the coat, the fibers, the vintage weave brushing against the rabbit. He imagined the man's hand, steady, guiding the family toward the tunnel hatch. And then he noticed something he had missed before. The shadow wasn't just near Elaine. It was touching her. Fingers, faint but visible, curled lightly around her elbow. Greer exhaled sharply. The tall man hadn't simply watched. He had led them. The next morning he drove back to the nursing home. Walter was asleep, his breathing shallow, his face slack with dreams. Greer didn't wake him. Instead, he left a note on the bedside table. "Thank you. You were right." There was always a man. He returned to Briarwood, more certain than ever. The Halloways' disappearance wasn't random. It was history repeating itself. And this time, Greer intended to break the cycle. The storm broke the night Greer decided to open the sealed chamber. Rain lashed the glass roof of Briarwood Station, hammering like impatient fists. Lightning flickered through the iron beams, throwing shadows across the deserted concourse. The last train had gone. Only echoes remained. Greer stood at the far end of Platform 9, boots planted, coat collar high. Behind him, 2 officers hauled equipment, bolt cutters, portable lights, crowbars. The hatch gaped open, black breath rising from the tunnels below. "You sure about this, sir?" one officer asked, his voice barely steady. Greer's jaw tightened. "We've circled it long enough. Tonight we see what's inside." They descended. The tunnels seemed narrower, the air heavier than before. Water dripped from the ceiling in steady ticks. Their lamps carved trembling cones of light through dust and shadows. They followed the map Greer had pieced together from old blueprints, past the chamber with the drawings, past the branching corridors, to the section marked sealed. There it was. A brick wall, uneven, mortar crumbling, newer than the rest of the tunnel, as if slapped up in haste. Spray painted across it in faded white was a warning. "Keep out." Greer ran his hand over the surface, cold, damp, and hollow-sounding when he knocked. "Break it." The officers hesitated. Then the crowbars bit into the mortar, pulling bricks free one by one. Dust billowed. The clang of falling stone echoed like gunfire. The wall gave way, revealing a void beyond. The smell hit first. Rot, old deep, clinging to the lungs. Greer lifted his lamp. The chamber stretched wide, brick-lined, its ceiling low and curved. Rusted chains dangled from hooks along the walls. In the center stood a wooden chair, its arms dark-stained, straps still buckled. Around it lay more belongings, scattered like offerings. A child's marbles, a man's pocket watch, a woman's scarf turned to threads. And bones, small, large, scattered, some gnawed. Greer's stomach clenched, bile rising. The room was not just a chamber, it was a tomb. For hours the team catalogued. Each object bagged, each bone marked. Greer worked in silence, his gloves trembling as he lifted a tiny shoe, its leather cracked but unmistakably child-sized. He thought of the boys from 1954, of the couple in 36, of the family in 1912, and of the Halloways. This was where the disappearances ended, or at least where some of them did, but not all. There were no bones small enough to be Daniel's, none that matched Melanie's build. Greer stood in the center of the chamber, breath echoing in the stale air. "They were here," he whispered, "but not all of them died here." The tall man hadn't just consumed. He had kept some alive. By dawn, the chamber was sealed again. Crime scene tape stretched across the broken wall. Outside, the storm had passed. The city stirred awake, oblivious to the horrors unearthed beneath its streets. Greer sat at his desk, staring at the evidence board. Photographs of the chamber were pinned up now, chains, bones, artifacts. The rabbit still sat at the center. Reporters screamed for answers. The chief demanded progress. Families of long-forgotten victims called the precinct, their voices trembling with old grief. But Greer's mind circled the same fact. The Halloways' remains weren't there, which meant someone had taken them further. That evening, he played the cassette again. "Dad, can we go now? It's late." "Shh, just wait. The train is coming." You'll see Greer turned up the volume, leaning close. Beneath the hiss of static, he heard something else he had missed before. A faint clank, metal against stone, chains, the chamber. The recording wasn't made on the platform at all. It was made below. Greer shut his eyes, the voices sinking into him. The man's tone was not hurried. It was patient, almost tender, as if what was about to happen was inevitable. The train is coming, not a train of steel and steam. Something else. The next day, Greer met again with Walter Price at the nursing home. "Did you ever hear?" Greer asked carefully. "About a chamber below the station." "A place sealed off?" Walter's eyes clouded. His voice dropped to a whisper. "We all knew. But we didn't talk." "You didn't talk about the black room, the black room?" "That's what the old-timers called it. Said it was where the station kept its mistakes. The fire, the accidents, the ones who never made it home." Walter shivered. "And the man in the coat. They said he had a key, always a key." Greer felt the hairs on his neck rise. The tall man had not only haunted the platform, he had ruled beneath it. That night, Greer returned to the tunnels alone. He stood at the broken wall, lamp casting long shadows across the chains. He tried to picture the man, tall, faceless, coat brushing the floor, holding a key, leading families into the dark with promises of trains that never came. Greer whispered into the silence, voice steady. "Where did you take them?" No answer came, only the drip of water, the scuttle of unseen rats. But in the corner of his vision, he thought he saw movement, a shadow leaning just beyond the reach of his lamp. When he swung the beam, the space was empty. Yet the air felt watched. The package arrived on a Monday morning. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper, string tied tight. No return address, no postage. Just left on the front steps of the precinct sometime before dawn. An officer brought it into Greer's office, setting it carefully on the desk. "This was outside, sir." Nobody saw who dropped it. Greer stared at it for a long moment, a knot tightening in his stomach. The package felt like an answer, though not the kind he wanted. He slipped on gloves and cut the string. The paper fell away, revealing a cardboard box stained with damp. Inside was a cassette tape, its label smudged but legible. Halloway. Tape 2. Greer's breath caught. He called the lab immediately. Within the hour, he and the technician sat in the soundproof room. The deck clicked, the tape began to spin. Static filled the speakers, then a voice. Elaine's voice. "Please, just let us go. The children are tired. We'll do whatever you want, just..." A man's voice cut her off, calm, almost gentle. Shh. They'll be safe. You'll all be safe when the train comes. Daniel's voice followed, high and confused. Mom? Where's the train? Why are we underground? Silence, then a scrape, the sound of chains moving. A soft whimper from Melanie. And finally, the man again, his tone shifting, darker now. Don't cry. You'll frighten the others. The tape clicked off. The technician stared, pale. Greer pressed his palms against the table, his heart hammering. There was no question now. The Halloways had been in the chamber. The tall man had spoken to them. And someone wanted Greer to hear it. By noon, the precinct was swarming. The chief demanded explanations. Reporters howled outside. The tape leaked somehow, its contents summarized in lurid headlines. Voices from the tunnels. Elaine's last plea. Crowds gathered at the station, leaving flowers, shouting questions, chanting demands for answers. Platform 9 became a shrine and a spectacle, candles burning against the yellow tape. Greer tried to ignore it. He locked himself in his office, spreading photographs across the desk. The rabbit, the bones, the chamber, now the tape. He played the man's words again and again. The train is coming. What train? What others? The thought gnawed at him. That night he drove home late. The streets were slick with rain, lamps glowing like blurred halos. He parked, climbed the steps to his apartment, and stopped. There was an envelope taped to his door. He tore it down, hands trembling. Inside was a single Polaroid. 4 figures, blurred in motion, standing on a platform. Thomas, Elaine, Daniel with his rabbit, Melanie clutching her mother's arm. The photograph was dated in the white margin. October 12th, 1997, the night they vanished. And in the corner, almost out of frame, was a 5th figure. Tall, coat hanging long, watching. Greer barely slept. The image burned into him, searing behind his eyes. By dawn, he was back at the station. He walked platform 9 slowly, Polaroid in hand, aligning angles, lamps, benches. The photo had been taken from this very spot. Someone had stood here, camera raised, while the Halloways waited for their train. Someone had watched and planned, and preserved the moment like a trophy. Greer lowered the photo. His breath clouded in the cold morning air. The tall man wasn't just a phantom. He was a collector. Later that week, Greer returned to the tunnels with a forensic team. They swept deeper, following passages beyond the chamber. Dust shifted beneath their boots. Rats darted across rubble. One tunnel sloped downward, narrower, suffocating. At the end lay another door, iron-banded, swollen with age. A heavy padlock held it shut. The locksmith took nearly half an hour to crack it. The hinges groaned as the door swung inward. The smell was worse than before. Inside lay another room, smaller, its walls lined with shelves. On them sat objects sealed in jars, preserved in dust, scraps of fabric, locks of hair, yellowed photographs curled at the edges. An archive, the man's archive. Greer picked up a jar. Inside, tied with a ribbon, was a strand of blonde hair. Another jar held a cracked toy car. Another, a pair of spectacles so small they could have belonged to a child. On the far shelf lay newer items. A juice box, mold blackened. A pair of headphones. A Polaroid camera. Greer's throat constricted. The Halloways had been here. He placed the items down carefully, fighting a wave of nausea. The man had not killed in chaos. He had curated, preserved, as if building a museum of vanished lives. One shelf was empty. Dust swept clear. Waiting. That night, the news broke. Someone had leaked details of the archive, and the city erupted. Parents pulled children from trains. Commuters swore they heard whispers in the tunnels. Candlelight vigils turned into protests, crowds pressing against barricades, chanting for the truth. Greer stood at his office window. watching the chaos below. His reflection looked gaunt, hollow-eyed. The tall man was still out there, watching too, maybe even in the crowd, coat pulled tight, eyes hidden. Greer felt it like a presence, just beyond sight. The station wasn't safe, and if the man's archive had taught him anything, it was this. He wasn't finished. The city had reached its breaking point. By the second week after the discovery of the archive, Briarwood Station was no longer just a transport hub. It was a wound. Police cordons wrapped the entrances. Protesters swarmed the barricades, waving signs. "Where are the Halloways? Who is the man in the code?" Candles guttered in plastic cups, wax pooling onto the cold stone. Reporters shouted over each other, cameras trained on every uniform. Greer pushed through it all, coat collar turned up, head low. The crowd roared his name, questions and accusations colliding into a storm. He ignored them, climbing the steps two at a time, slipping inside. The concourse was eerily empty. Echoes of chanting outside bled faintly through the glass roof. Greer felt the station shudder, not from trains, but from the weight of memory. Every brick whispered. In his office, a message was waiting. It was slipped under his door. No envelope, just a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was neat, almost elegant. "Detective, you've been very thorough. You've seen what others ignored. You know now the station keeps its own, but you're missing the last piece. If you want to find them, come alone. Platform 9, midnight." A friend. Greer read it 3 times. His chest tightened with each pass. It was bait. He knew it. But it was also a summons, and he couldn't ignore it. The hours until midnight stretched slow, each one thick with unease. Greer prepared as though for war, flashlight, recorder, weapon. He told no one, not even the chief. If this was a trap, dragging others into it would only add to the body count. Rain fell again as the clock neared 12. The city outside was restless, sirens wailing in distant neighborhoods. Greer drove through empty streets, his headlights cutting wet pavement into slices of silver. Briarwood Station loomed ahead, dark against the storm. The police cordon was light at night. Protests slept while the city's shadows stayed awake. Greer flashed his badge, muttered an excuse, and slipped inside. Platform 9 waited. The lamps buzzed, their glow weak, halos in the mist. The clock above the platform ticked past midnight. Greer stood still, breath clouding, hand on the grip of his gun. At first, nothing. Only the hum of electricity, the drip of rain through cracks in the roof. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. A figure emerged from the far shadows. Tall, the coat hung long, brushing the floor. The face remained in shadow, brim of a hat pulled low. Greer's pulse hammered. "You've been watching me," Greer said, voice rough. The man stopped several yards away. His presence filled the platform, though he made no movement. "You took them," Greer pressed. "The Halloways, the children, the families before them. Where are they?" The man tilted his head slightly, as though considering the question. His voice, when it came, was calm, measured. "They are where they belong." Greer tightened his grip. "You killed them." "No." The man's tone sharpened. "I preserved them." The world forgets. The station remembers. That is the rule. Greer stepped closer, his lamp beam cutting across the coat. Fibers glinted faintly. Wool, vintage weave. Exactly as the lab described. "Why the Halloways?" Greer demanded. "Why any of them?" The man spread his hands slightly. "The station chooses. I obey." They were passengers, and their train came. "You're insane." The man chuckled softly. "Madness is only what others cannot see. You see it now. You've walked the tunnels. You've touched the chains." He gestured toward the hatch. "Come, detective. Come see the terminus." Greer's stomach twisted. He knew he should arrest him, should end it here, but his feet betrayed him. The man's voice was not just sound. It pulled like gravity. One step forward, then another. They descended into the tunnels together, the lamps above fading to nothing. The man carried no light, yet moved with certainty, as if the dark itself guided him. The path wound deeper, past the chamber, past the archive, into corridors Greer had never seen. The air grew colder, fouler. Water dripped in steady rhythm. Finally, they stopped at a door of iron bars, rust-eaten, chained shut. The man produced a key from his pocket, ancient brass. He turned it slowly, the click echoing. The door creaked open. Beyond lay blackness so thick it seemed alive. "Here," the man said softly. "This is where the journeys end." Greer raised his flashlight. The beam fell on a rows of benches, like those of a train carriage, bolted into the stone floor. Figures sat upon them, motionless, dozens of them, skeletons dressed in rags. Some leaned forward, skulls tilted. Others slumped sideways, arms locked around faded belongings. A child's skeleton still clutched a cracked toy car. A woman's bony hand rested on a withered purse. It was a carriage of the dead. Greer staggered back, bile burning his throat. "My God!" The man's voice floated through the chamber. "Not God!" "The station. It keeps them all. The train never leaves. It only arrives." Greer swung his light wildly, searching for movement. Somewhere among the corpses, a sound echoed. A faint whimper. Not all were bones. At the far end, in the shadows, something shifted, breathing, alive. Greer's heart surged. "Halloways!" he shouted. The man raised a finger to his lips. "Shh! You'll frighten the others." Greer lunged forward, but the tall man stepped into his path, coat sweeping wide. "You can't take them," he said calmly. "They've boarded. They belong here now." Greer drew his gun, hands shaking. "Move!" The man smiled faintly, eyes glinting in the dark. "If you remove one, the station will take another. That is balance." Greer's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, the chamber itself seemed to tremble. A low rumble echoed through the walls, like wheels on distant tracks. The corpses rattled on their benches. Dust fell from the ceiling. And from the shadows at the far end, a child's voice rose, thin and terrified. "Mom?" Greer's blood froze. "Daniel." He shoved past the man, racing toward the sound. His flashlight beam cut across rows of bones, landing finally on a figure huddled against the wall. Small, alive. Daniel's eyes squinted in the sudden light, cheeks hollow, hair matted. He whimpered, raising a hand against the glare. "Daniel!" Greer shouted. He dropped to his knees, reaching for the boy. "It's okay. I've got you." The tall man's voice thundered from behind. "Take him, and the station will take another. Remember the rule." Greer ignored him, pulling Daniel close. The boy's thin arms clung to his neck, trembling. The rumble grew louder, the chamber shaking. Somewhere in the dark, a sound like a whistle blew. Low, mournful, echoing through stone. The man's silhouette loomed, coat spread like wings. "The train is here," he whispered, "and it is never late." Greer ran. Daniel's thin arms clung desperately to his neck, the boy's breath hot and ragged against his collar. Behind them, the rumble deepened. An impossible vibration, like wheels grinding against stone. The chamber shook. Bones clattered against benches. Dust fell in choking clouds. The tall man's voice carried above the din. "You cannot take what belongs here." Greer didn't answer. His lamp swung wildly, carving fractured slices of light across skeletal passengers frozen in their eternal ride. He stumbled toward the iron gate. The way out. The only way. His free hand grasped the bars. Cold metal. Slick with rust. He shoved Daniel through first, the boy's whimper slicing through the roar. Then Greer squeezed through, shoulder scraping. The padlock still dangled open from when the man had turned the key. Greer slammed the gate shut. The tall man stood inside, just beyond reach. His coat swayed though there was no wind. His face remained shadowed. "Balance will be kept," he intoned. "If not the boy, then another." Greer's flashlight caught the glint of his eyes. Inhumanly calm. Patient. Then the rumble ceased. The chamber fell silent, save for Daniel's quiet sobs. Greer backed away, dragging the boy into the tunnel. He heard no pursuit. When he looked back, the man was still there, motionless behind the bars. Watching, the climb upward was a blur. Tunnels twisted, water dripped, rats scattered in their path. Daniel stumbled, weak from hunger and fear. Greer half carried him, whispering assurances he didn't believe. "You're safe now. I've got you. We're almost out." The boy clutched the rabbit to his chest, its ear torn, fur matted. But it was still there, a piece of his life before the darkness. Finally, the hatch appeared, the ladder up, a square of faint light. Greer boosted Daniel first, urging him to climb. Small hands clung to the rungs, pulling, trembling. Greer followed, his own muscles screaming. They emerged onto platform 9. The station was empty. The lamps buzzed faintly, casting long shadows. For a moment, it felt like surfacing from the bottom of a black sea. Greer dropped to the platform, pulling Daniel close. He inhaled the cool air greedily, the taste of dust still sharp in his mouth. But something was wrong. The station was too still. No echo of the city outside, no hum of distant trains. Only silence. Daniel whispered, "Where's Mom?" Greer's chest tightened. He had no answer. They left the platform, walking through the concourse. The ticket booths were deserted. The electric boards blank. Not even the security lights glowed. Briarwood Station was dead. Greer's pulse spiked. He pulled Daniel closer, scanning the shadows. "It's okay. Just stay with me." His own voice sounded thin, swallowed by the emptiness. They pushed through the main doors. Outside, the city was gone. Where streets should have been, there was only fog. Dense, endless, swallowing the horizon. Shapes shifted faintly within it, like carriages moving on invisible rails. A whistle blew somewhere deep within the mist, mournful and low. Daniel clung tighter, trembling. "Where are we?" Greer's throat went dry. We're still in the station. Just a trick." It has to be. But the truth pressed harder. They had left the chamber, but not escaped the station's grasp. The train had come, and they had boarded without knowing. Hours blurred. Greer led Daniel back inside, desperate for bearings. Every corridor seemed longer than it should be. Every door led only deeper into the maze. The boy grew weaker. He whimpered for his mother, his sister, water, light. Greer searched frantically for a working tap, a vending machine, anything. But the station offered nothing. At one point, he heard footsteps echoing. Relief surged. Another officer, perhaps, but when he turned the corner, the sound vanished, leaving only a whisper through the air. "Balance will be kept." Greer pressed a hand to the wall, fighting despair. The bricks pulsed faintly beneath his palm, like a heartbeat. The station was alive. Sometime later, minutes, hours, he couldn't tell. Greer spotted a figure ahead, a woman standing beneath a lamp, her back to them. She held the hand of a child. "Elaine?" Greer whispered. He hurried forward, Daniel stumbling beside him. The woman turned. Her face was pale, hollow, eyes sunken. But it was Elaine Halloway, and the child clutching her hand. Melanie. Alive. Greer's chest surged. "Elaine!" "It's me, Detective Greer. I found Daniel. You're safe now. Come with me." But Elaine only tilted her head. Her lips moved, voice faint. "You shouldn't have taken him." Greer froze. What? Her eyes flicked to Daniel. He boarded. You took him off the train. That means someone else must ride. Her hand tightened on Melanie's. The girl's eyes were empty, doll-like, as if something had hollowed her out. Elaine stepped back into shadow. The station always takes its due. And then they were gone. Vanished. Daniel whimpered, burying his face in Greer's coat. I want to go home. Greer held him close, heartbreaking. I know, son. I know. But home felt like a word from another lifetime. The fog pressed against the windows. The lamps flickered overhead. Somewhere deep in the tunnels, a whistle blew again, closer this time. The train was circling back. Greer knew then. The Halloways were not lost individually. They were bound together like carriages in a chain. To save one was to risk the others. And the tall man would not stop until balance was restored. Greer did not sleep. The station would not allow it. Hours bled into hours. He sat on a bench, Daniel curled against him, the boy's small frame rising and falling with shallow breaths. Greer's eyelids burned, but every time he drifted, the rumble came. The phantom vibration of a train on hidden tracks, the whistle low and mournful. It was a warning. Close your eyes, and you'll wake to find him gone. So Greer kept watch. The lamps buzzed overhead, flickering like failing stars. Shadows pooled in the corners of the concourse, stretching and retracting with the rhythm of the unseen rails. And always, he felt eyes. By dawn, if dawn existed here, a note appeared on the floor at his feet. No footsteps had approached. No hand had delivered it. But there it lay, folded, the paper yellowing at the edges. Greer picked it up, hands shaking. Detective, you took a passenger off the train. That upsets the balance. The station does not forgive imbalance. Return what you took, or offer another in his place. Conductor Greer crushed the note in his fist, rage boiling. I'm not bargaining with you, he whispered. Daniel stirred, eyes half-lidded. What's wrong? Nothing, son. Go back to sleep. But Greer knew nothing was further from the truth. He wandered the station's endless halls, searching for any exit, any break in the fog. Each doorway opened only into more corridors, stairwells that circled back, escalators that climbed into nothing. Daniel grew weaker. His lips cracked, voice faint. I'm thirsty. Greer carried him, jaw clenched. He found a fountain at last, water dribbling weakly from its corroded spout. He cupped it, let Daniel drink. The boy's gratitude nearly broke him. But even as Daniel swallowed, Greer's mind spun around the words of the note. Return him, or offer another. It was a choice dressed as mercy, and he knew the station expected him to make it. Later, in the far hall of the concourse, he saw them again. Elaine, Melanie, standing in the glow of a lamp, faces pale, eyes hollow. Elaine's voice carried across the silence. You shouldn't have taken him, Detective. The train had come. You've delayed it. That makes the others suffer. Greer stepped forward, fists trembling. They're your children. Don't you want them free? Elaine tilted her head. Free? None of us are free. We boarded. We belong. Melanie's small voice followed, flat, mechanical. Someone else has to ride. The words echoed like iron striking stone, and then they dissolved, fading like mist. That night, if night existed here, Greer sat with Daniel again on the bench. He stared into the darkness, fighting thoughts he had sworn never to entertain. The station's bargain was clear. He could return the boy, deliver him back into the chamber of bones, or he could sacrifice someone else. But who? Himself? Would the station accept that? Or would it demand a living soul unbound by choice? The tall man's voice came from the shadows, calm, patient. You already know the answer. Greer spun, gun raised. The man stood at the far end of the platform, coat swaying, hat brim low. "You can take me," Greer snarled. The man shook his head slowly. "You are not a passenger. You are only the witness. The station does not take witnesses. It takes families. It takes those bound together." Greer's stomach twisted. "Then take me and him. Both of us." The man stepped closer, his face still veiled. "You are stubborn. But the station will not bend. If the boy stays, another must ride. That is the rule." Greer's hand shook on the gun. He wanted to fire, to tear holes through the shadow and coat, but deep inside he knew bullets meant nothing here. The man's voice lowered. "You must choose. That is your ticket price." Then he was gone. Greer held Daniel tighter, the boy stirring in half-sleep. "Don't let them take me," Daniel murmured. Tears stung Greer's eyes. "Never, I won't let them." But in his chest, the war raged. If he kept Daniel, who would be taken instead? Another family? Another child? The note had said offer another. Did that mean someone from outside? Someone waiting in the real city unaware? Would the station reach up and pluck a random passenger just to balance the scales? Greer buried his face in his hands. He had solved mysteries before, traced evidence, broken cases with reason. But this was not reason. This was ritual. And rituals demanded sacrifice. At some point, exhaustion claimed him. He awoke to find Daniel gone from his lap. Panic surged through him. He stumbled to his feet, shouting the boy's name, echoes rebounding off stone. Then he saw him, at the far end of the platform, standing at the edge of the tracks. Daniel's rabbit dangled from his hand. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. Greer sprinted, heart hammering. "Daniel, get back!" The boy swayed slightly, as if listening to a voice only he could hear. "The train is here," he whispered. "No, it's not!" Greer reached him, yanking him back from the edge. His flashlight beam swept the tracks. Empty, no rails, just blackness yawning into nothing. But the rumble came again. Louder, closer. A whistle screamed, piercing, rattling the glass roof. And in the blackness below, lights appeared. Two pale orbs, glaring like eyes, growing brighter as they surged forward. Daniel screamed, clutching Greer. The train was coming. The lights grew larger. Twin beams seared through the black gulf of the tracks, cutting through fog that seemed to bleed from the stone itself. The rumble deepened, vibrating the platform until dust cascaded from the ceiling in pale streams. Daniel screamed into Greer's chest. The boy's rabbit fell from his hand, tumbling toward the edge. Greer dragged him back, heart pounding. "Stay with me, don't look at it." But he couldn't resist. His eyes were drawn forward, helpless, as the train emerged from the darkness. It was enormous, far larger than any commuter line he had ever seen. Its body shimmered, half solid, half vapor, as if carved from smoke and iron. Windows flickered with pale light. Shadows moved inside. Passengers, dozens of them, sitting motionless, staring out with hollow eyes. The whistle screamed again, a sound of grief, of finality. The train slowed. It was stopping. At platform 9. Greer stumbled backward, dragging Daniel, but the air itself seemed to resist, thickening, pulling them toward the edge. The tall man appeared, stepping from the mist, coat sweeping like a banner, his voice carried even above the roar. "The train has come." The passenger must board. "No!" Greer bellowed. His throat tore with the force of it. "You're not taking him." The man tilted his head. "Then balance will be kept elsewhere. Another will ride in his place. Perhaps your mother, perhaps a child you've never met. But one will board." Greer's vision blurred. His own pulse thundered in his ears. He saw again the archive, the jars, the bones, the toys sealed in glass. Not chaos, but curation. A ledger balanced by pain. Daniel clutched him tighter. "I want Mom," he whispered. Greer's heart broke. The doors of the train hissed open. Cold air swept the platform, carrying with it the stench of rust, of mildew, of graves. The lights within glowed brighter, revealing passengers inside, skeletal, pale, frozen in eternal wait. At the nearest door stood a woman, Elaine. Her eyes were hollow, but her voice was soft. "Daniel, come. Your seat is ready." Behind her, Melanie's small face appeared, lips pale, eyes blank. She reached out a hand. Daniel whimpered, torn between reaching back and burying his face deeper in Greer's chest. Greer shouted across the roar, "Elaine, fight it! You don't have to do this!" But she only repeated, "Come. The train won't wait." The tall man stepped closer, shadow stretching long across the platform. "This is mercy, detective." "To deny it is to doom another. Are you so selfish?" Greer raised his gun, hands shaking. "Stay back." The man didn't flinch. The barrel pointed directly at his chest, but his voice was steady. "You cannot shoot what is already written." Greer pulled the trigger. The shot cracked, echoing like thunder. The man staggered slightly, coat rippling, but no blood, no wound. He straightened, eyes glinting beneath the brim. Futile. The gun fell from Greer's trembling hands. The platform vibrated harder, pulling like a tide. Daniel was wrenched from his grip, sliding toward the open doors. Greer lunged, catching his arm. Their hands locked, knuckles white. The boy's eyes were wide with terror. "Don't let me go!" "I won't!" Greer roared. His muscles screamed as the pull strengthened, dragging them inch by inch toward the edge. Passengers inside the train leaned forward now, faces pressed to glass, eyes glimmering like dying embers. They watched hungrily. Elaine's voice floated across, calm, inevitable. "Balance, detective." Balance. Greer's vision blurred with tears. His grip slipped. No. In that moment, another figure appeared on the platform. Micah Carraway, the older man who had whispered rebellion, who had dialed for help. His chest was still bandaged, movements weak, but his eyes blazed with defiance. "Take me," Micah shouted. His voice cracked but carried. "Leave the boy. Take me instead." The tall man turned slowly, considering. Greer's heart leapt. "He's offering himself. Take him." The man's head tilted. "He is no longer bound. His family is gone. The station has no claim." Micah's face twisted. "Then damn your rules!" He charged forward, seizing Daniel's other arm, bracing against the pull. "Run, detective!" Greer stumbled back, dragging Daniel with every ounce of strength. Micah strained, holding them, buying seconds. The tall man raised a hand. The train roared louder, its whistle screaming. The pull surged. With a cry, Micah lost his footing. The tide claimed him. Greer's last glimpse was of the old man being dragged into the carriage, swallowed by the light. Elaine reached to steady him, guiding him gently to a seat. His eyes locked on Greer's for one final moment, full of grief and yet relief. Then the doors hissed shut. The whistle blew. The train pulled away, vanishing into the black gulf. Silence fell. The platform stilled. The air lightened. Daniel collapsed into Greer's arms, sobbing. "He saved me." Greer held him close, chest heaving. His own tears streamed hot, cutting through grime. Micah was gone, but Daniel was still here. The lamps flickered once, twice, then steadied. For the first time since entering this nightmare, Greer felt the station breathe out, balance restored. For now. Greer staggered through the concourse. Daniel clutched tight. He no longer knew where the corridors led, whether doors would open onto streets or fog. But he walked anyway, one step at a time. And as he did, the tall man's voice followed, echoing softly through the vast emptiness. "This is not the end, detective. The station always takes its due. The train will come again." Greer didn't answer. He kept walking. Greer kept walking. His steps echoed through the hollow concourse. each one uneven beneath Daniel's weight. The boy clung to him, face buried against his shoulder, too exhausted for tears. The silence pressed in, broken only by the distant hum of electricity. The lamps overhead glowed steady, no longer flickering. The air had shifted. It felt thinner, easier to breathe. But the tall man's words lingered. "The train will come again." Greer swallowed hard and pushed forward. They passed through the ticket hall. The booths stood empty, glass smeared with dust. The departure boards blinked weakly, as if struggling to wake. And then, with a sudden click, letters appeared. 7:45. Departure. City Line. Greer froze. The boards continued to update, flickering, filling with schedules. Trains listed by time, by platform. It was as if the station itself had stirred back to life. Daniel lifted his head, voice weak. "Does that mean we can go home?" Greer kissed the boy's hair, though his lips trembled. "We'll try." He guided Daniel toward the main doors. His heart hammered as he pushed against the glass. This time, they opened. Outside, dawn light spilled across Briarwood Square. Not fog, not blackness. Streets stretched out, wet with rain, taxis moving, pigeons scattering as the doors swung wide. Greer nearly collapsed from relief. They were back. Real. The city had returned. Daniel gasped, clutching him tighter, eyes wide at the sight of cars and people. "We're out!" Greer held him, knees weak. He could hear distant sirens, the roar of morning traffic. He wanted to weep with gratitude. But when he looked back, through the glass, Platform 9 stood empty, silent, and the departure board still ticked on, letters shifting, as if the station were not finished. Hours blurred. Paramedics swarmed when they emerged fully onto the street. Greer gave his name, badge number, half-coherent fragments of what had happened. Daniel was whisked into an ambulance, IVs fitted, questions asked gently by social workers. Reporters shouted, flashes burned. Greer kept his arm around the boy, shielding him. He said nothing about the train, nothing about the tall man. Only, "The Holloway boy has been found." Behind him, the station loomed. To every other eye, it was just stone and glass, busy with commuters. But Greer saw more. He saw the shadows still lingering in the windows. He heard the echo of a whistle no one else seemed to notice. Balance restored. For now, later, at the hospital, Greer sat outside Daniel's room. The boy slept at last, rabbit tucked under his chin, monitors beeping softly. Doctors said he would live. Weak, malnourished, but alive. Greer pressed his hands over his face. Micah's last expression burned in his mind, sacrifice and defiance, swallowed by the train. He had balanced the scales. For Daniel, for a boy who wasn't even his own. But how many more would vanish before someone else took a stand? The station would hunger again. Detective Reyes found him there, hours later. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice low. "You saved him." Greer shook his head. "I bought him time." "That's all. The station will open its doors again." Reyes frowned. "Greer, what are you saying?" He met her eyes. "Platform 9 isn't just where they vanished, it's where they're kept. It doesn't end with the Holloways." Her brow furrowed, searching his face. "You're exhausted. Get some rest." Greer looked back at the sleeping boy. "I'll rest when I know no one else has to board that train." But in his chest, he already knew. Rest would never come. That night, after leaving the hospital, Greer returned to Briarwood Station. Rain slicked the square, neon reflecting in the puddles. Commuters bustled, taxis honked. Life carried on as if nothing had happened. But when Greer stepped inside, he felt it again. The pulse, the hum beneath the floor, the waiting. He walked to Platform 9. It looked ordinary, empty, only a few discarded newspapers on the benches, but the lamps buzzed faintly as if aware of him. The clock above ticked steadily. Greer stared into the darkness of the tracks. And for a moment, just a moment, he saw them. Dozens of faces, pale and hollow, staring back from the black. Elaine, Melanie, Micah, and beyond them, others he didn't know. Families, children, all waiting. The image dissolved like smoke, but the echo of a whistle lingered, soft, mournful. Greer stood there for a long time, rain dripping from his coat, until the lamps finally flickered and steadied again. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "I'll be here when it comes back." And he turned, walking into the waking city. 6 months later, summer light spilled across Briarwood Square. Children chased pigeons near the fountain. Vendors sold coffee and newspapers. The world moved as if nothing dark had ever seeped beneath the stones. But Greer knew better. He stood across the street, watching commuters stream in and out of the station. His suit hung looser now. He had lost weight. His eyes were darker, ringed with sleepless nights. Platform 9 had been sealed temporarily after the Holloway investigation. Police tape, official notices, forensic vans. Reporters swarmed. The word miracle had been used again and again when Daniel was found alive. But miracles always came at a price. And no one wanted to speak about Micah, or Elaine, or Melanie. Only Greer carried their weight. Daniel had recovered slowly. The boy was living with his aunt now in San Antonio, surrounded by cousins. Therapists spoke gently of nightmares, of drawing pictures instead of words. Sometimes Greer visited. The boy would smile faintly, hold his rabbit, and ask when his mom was coming home. Greer never knew how to answer. He would just squeeze the boy's shoulder and say, "You're safe now." That's what matters, but safety was a fragile thing. Inside the station, life carried on. Greer returned often, though he no longer wore his badge. The department had called his resignation a breakdown, a case of trauma too heavy to carry. They weren't wrong. Now he came only as a man with unfinished business. He would sit on the benches of Platform 9, quiet, ordinary, just another commuter in appearance. He carried no briefcase, no ticket, only a small notebook filled with sketches of the train, of faces glimpsed in the glass. He waited, sometimes hours, sometimes entire nights, listening. The city above pulsed with life. But down here, beneath the lamps and the stone, he could still feel it. The heartbeat of the station, the whisper of rails unseen. The train hadn't come again. Not yet, but it would. On a warm evening in July, he sat there as the lamps dimmed. The concourse had emptied. Only the echo of his own breathing remained. He closed his eyes, and he heard it. Not the full roar, not the whistle, just the faintest vibration, like a memory rising from beneath the earth. Greer opened his eyes slowly. Across the platform, in the glass reflection of the departure board, he saw them. Elaine, Melanie, Micah, dozens of others. Watching, waiting. He did not move. He only whispered, "I remember you. I won't let you vanish." The reflections faded. The lamps brightened. Commuters began to return, footsteps scattering across the tiles. The ordinary world swallowed the moment. But Greer knew it was real. He walked out into the evening air, notebook heavy in his pocket. The square bustled with laughter and chatter. Neon signs flickered to life. Greer paused at the fountain, staring at the water rippling under the lights. He thought of Daniel's small hand gripping his in the dark, whispering, "Don't let me go." He thought of Micah's last look, full of sorrow and resolve, as the train claimed him. And he thought of the tall man's words, "The station always takes its due." Greer knew he couldn't stop the train, but maybe, just maybe, he could warn others. Watch the patterns, trace the disappearances, stand guard at the edge of the platform when the lamps began to flicker. A lone sentinel against something that had no end. He looked back at the looming facade of Briarwood Station. Its windows glowed gold in the fading light. Ordinary, harmless. Yet to him, it was a predator. a living thing with endless patience. The whistle would sound again, and when it did, Detective Greer would be waiting.